Diane Lane has spent her entire life in front of the camera, but the spotlight has often been less forgiving than it appears. With every role came whispers, and with every co-star came a rumor. For decades, Hollywood painted her private life as if it were just another script, blurring the lines between the woman she truly was and the characters she played. At 59, the actress is no longer willing to let those rumors define her, and she has begun to reveal which stories held truth, and which were nothing more than inventions designed to sell headlines. Richard Gere and the Weight of Suspicion. The rumors about Diane Lane began long before her career reached its height. One of the most persistent involved Richard Gere. Their story goes back to 1984, when the two starred together in The Cotton Club, Francis Ford Coppola's ambitious yet troubled film that assembled some of Hollywood's brightest talents of the decade. At that time, Lane was still a rising actress trying to shed the image of the teenage ingenue she had carried from A Little Romance, while Gere was already recognized as one of the leading men of his generation after American Gigolo and An Officer and a Gentleman. Their on-screen presence was effortless, two striking figures with a natural rhythm that seemed to flow beyond the script. Almost immediately, gossip columns began asking whether that chemistry carried over into their private lives. Lane dismissed the speculation, insisting that her focus was solely on building a career, but the seed had already been planted in Hollywood's imagination. As the years went on, both actors carved separate paths. Gere became a symbol of romantic Hollywood, his face gracing countless magazine covers, while Lane struggled with the uneven rhythm of a career that alternated between breakthroughs and setbacks. Yet the shadow of the Cotton Club lingered, remembered less for its artistic value and more for the rumors it ignited. By the time Lane found herself in the midst of a career renaissance in the early 2000s, the whispers about Gere returned with renewed force. In 2002, Unfaithful reignited everything. Directed by Adrian Lyne, the erotic thriller cast Gere as Edward Sumner and Lane as Connie, his wife, who becomes entangled in a dangerous extramarital affair. The film was searing in its emotional intensity. Gere played the wounded husband with restrained anguish, while Lane delivered a performance of shattering vulnerability and reckless passion. Their scenes together carried such raw electricity that audiences believed only something real could explain it. The film was a commercial success. Lane earned an Academy Award nomination, and critics singled out the devastating realism of their marriage in crisis. But with acclaim came a darker wave of speculation. Was it truly just acting, or had life and art blurred behind closed doors? Lane would later insist that the closeness she shared with Gere had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with trust. They had known each other for nearly 20 years, and that familiarity gave them the freedom to explore dangerous emotional territory without fear. It was, in her words, a gift of collaboration, not a confession of intimacy. Yet Hollywood tabloids rarely settle for nuance. For them, the explanation sounded like evasion. For Lane, it became a painful lesson that in a world hungry for scandal, even the purest dedication to her craft could be twisted into suspicion. Matthew McConaughey and the childhood crush. By the time Diane Lane appeared alongside Matthew McConaughey in the 2019 thriller Serenity, she was already a veteran actress with decades of hard-earned respect. McConaughey, by contrast, was entering a new phase of his career, having reinvented himself from romantic comedy star to Academy Award-winning actor. Their collaboration might have been just another professional pairing, but McConaughey made a revelation during press interviews that ensured their partnership would be remembered differently. He admitted that, as a teenager, he had harbored a crush on Diane Lane. She was one of the actresses he admired from afar, watching her early films and dreaming of one day sharing the screen with her. That confession, charming to some, embarrassing to Lane herself, added a peculiar weight to their interactions. In Serenity, the two played former lovers drawn back together by a dangerous plot, and the mixture of nostalgia and tension made their scenes pulse with an authenticity that was difficult to ignore. For Lane, the comments were both flattering and uncomfortable. She acknowledged McConaughey's openness, but quickly drew a line between personal admiration and professional reality. She wanted it to be understood that what the audience saw on screen was acting, not a reflection of hidden feelings. Yet the narrative had already taken root in Hollywood gossip circles, the handsome leading man with a boyhood crush finally meeting his muse. Behind the stories, the truth was far simpler. Lane treated McConaughey with the same professionalism she had shown throughout her career, while he expressed nothing but respect for her craft. Their collaboration highlighted the way Hollywood often spins harmless anecdotes into suggestive tales. For Lane, it was another reminder of how easily admiration could be twisted into speculation, leaving her once again forced to correct the public's perception of her private life. Robert Duvall and the Shadows of Lonesome Dove. In 1989, Diane Lane's career intersected with one of television's most celebrated projects, the miniseries Lonesome Dove, adapted from Larry McMurtry's Pulitzer Prize-winning novel. Lane took on the role of Lorena Wood, a young woman whose resilience and vulnerability left a lasting impression on audiences. Opposite her was Robert Duvall, portraying the iconic Augustus Gus McCrae, a former Texas Ranger whose mixture of charm and weariness helped define the story's emotional core. Their scenes together carried undeniable weight, and it did not take long for rumors to emerge. Fans and critics alike pointed to the chemistry between Lane and Duvall as evidence that something more than acting might be at play. Lane was still in her 20s, Duvall nearly 3 decades older, but gossip magazines thrived on such contrasts. The speculation suggested that their partnership on Lonesome Dove had extended into real life, blurring the line between fiction and reality. Lane never encouraged the talk. She spoke openly about her admiration for Duvall's craft, praising his ability to embody a character with authenticity and humanity. He, in turn, recognized her commitment and professionalism. Yet the whispers persisted, fueled not by any evidence, but by the sheer believability of their on-screen connection. Once again, Lane was caught in the cycle she knew too well, celebrated for her talent, but simultaneously reduced to questions about her private life. For her, the experience was bittersweet. Lonesome Dove brought her critical recognition and showcased her ability to stand alongside some of the most respected actors in the industry. But it also reminded her of the constant shadow trailing her career. That success would always be accompanied by rumors, and dignity would require silence in the face of stories she could not control. The tragedy for Lane was not in her work, but in the way her achievements were so often overshadowed by questions she never wanted to answer. The Outsiders, Young Love, and the tangled web of Christopher Atkins and Matt Dillon. For Diane Lane, the early 1980s were a period of both professional breakthroughs and personal complications. At just 18, she was cast in Francis Ford Coppola's The Outsiders, a film that would go on to define a generation of young actors. The movie brought together future stars like Tom Cruise, Patrick Swayze, Emilio Estevez, Rob Lowe, Matt Dillon, and C. Thomas Howell. Lane played Sherry "Cherry" Valance, the privileged girl who dares to cross social boundaries, and it was here that rumors about her personal life began to intertwine with her career in ways that were both exciting and damaging. During the production, Lane grew close to Christopher Atkins. Though he did not hold a major role in the film, his presence on set was enough for the two to develop a real off-screen romance. Young, attractive, and at the dawn of their careers, they became a couple that gossip magazines adored. Their relationship lasted for a time, but like many youthful romances in Hollywood, it eventually faded. Lane has since spoken of Atkins with fondness, describing their time together as one of those innocent periods when fame and curiosity were still new and overwhelming. But Atkins was not the only connection Lane made on The Outsiders. Her relationship with Matt Dillon was more complex. Dillon, who portrayed Dallas Winston, carried a brooding charisma that captivated audiences. Off-screen, he and Lane shared a brief romance that only added fuel to the rumors already surrounding her. At the time, she was still very young and navigating a career that demanded maturity far beyond her years. To outsiders, it appeared as though she was romantically entangled with multiple co-stars at once. For Lane, the reality was much simpler. Two youthful relationships that did not last but taught her how relentless the Hollywood rumor mill could be. Looking back, Lane has acknowledged both romances, first with Atkins and then with Dylan, but she also reflects on how difficult it was to face speculation at such a young age. The press seemed determined to define her by the men she dated, rather than the performances she delivered. What should have been remembered as a breakthrough role instead became one more chapter in the endless narrative of gossip that followed her. Danny Cannon, Nicolas Cage, and the rumors that refused to die. By the mid-1990s, Diane Lane was no longer the wide-eyed teenager of The Outsiders. She had become a seasoned actress, balancing fame with the heavy expectations that came with it. Yet the rumors did not slow down. If anything, they intensified as she worked with new collaborators. One of the most persistent stories came from her time on the 1995 science fiction action film Judge Dredd. Lane played Judge Hershey, opposite Sylvester Stallone's title character. On screen, her role demanded toughness and authority, a counterweight to Stallone's stoicism. Off-screen, however, it was not Stallone who caught her attention, but the film's director, Danny Cannon. Lane and Cannon began a short-lived romance during production. Unlike some of the earlier whispers, this relationship was real. The two were spotted together at events and seemed comfortable showing their affection in public. But as with many of Lane's relationships, the affair ended amicably. They moved on with their lives and careers, but the press continued to circle, eager to frame her as the actress who could not separate love from work. For Lane, it was a frustrating narrative that diminished her accomplishments. But she rarely fought back, choosing instead to maintain her dignity in silence. Then came Nicolas Cage. Lane first worked with him in Rumblefish, but at the time, their connection was limited to friendship. Years later, in 2000, they reunited on The Family Man, a film that explored choices, regret, and the fragile ties that hold lives together. It was during this period that their relationship shifted into something more intimate. Lane later confirmed that she and Cage had a brief romance, though it did not last long. Both were already established stars, both carried heavy professional commitments, and their paths eventually diverged. Despite its brevity, the relationship with Cage became one more chapter in the ongoing saga of Lane's supposed entanglements. To outsiders, it was confirmation of the pattern: another co-star, another affair. But Lane insisted that her professional life was always her priority. What the world interpreted as scandal, she saw simply as fragments of her private life, moments of companionship that did not define her career. Still, the weight of those rumors lingered, threatening to overshadow the work she cared most about: marriages, scandals, and the cost of silence. Beyond the whispers about co-stars, Diane Lane's personal life was defined by two marriages that each carried their own struggles. Her first was to French actor Christopher Lambert. The two first crossed paths in 1984 while she was promoting the Cotton Club, and after a brief affair, they reconnected when working together a few years later. They married in October 1988 in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and in 1993, they welcomed their daughter Eleanor, who would later pursue modeling. But behind the smiles, the marriage was fragile. Lane later admitted that she often felt lonely, describing herself as a nun in heat, waiting for a partner who was rarely present. By 1994, the marriage ended in divorce, leaving Lane disillusioned but determined to move forward. Nearly a decade later, she married Josh Brolin in August 2004. Their relationship began innocently enough, with a chance encounter after a film premiere where they discovered their children were the same age and attending the same school. It seemed like the beginning of a stable new chapter. But just months into the marriage, headlines exploded after Lane called the police, alleging that Brolin had struck her. He was arrested on a misdemeanor domestic battery charge, though Lane declined to press charges and insisted it was a misunderstanding. The incident left a permanent stain on their marriage, one that neither Hollywood nor the press would forget. They stayed together for nearly a decade, but the fractures were deep. In 2013, Lane filed for divorce, which was finalized later that year. Brolin later admitted that his life at the time was chaotic and that he had not yet learned how to control his behavior. For Lane, the divorce marked the end of her attempts at building a conventional family life under the scrutiny of fame. She was left to navigate a career still shadowed by rumors, a personal history scarred by scandal, and the heavy burden of silence she had carried for so long. At 59, her decision to finally speak openly about her past relationships was not just about setting the record straight. It was about reclaiming her story from decades of gossip that had too often spoken for her. Now that Diane Lane has revealed which rumors were true and which were nothing more than Hollywood fiction, her story feels both tragic and liberating. For years, her talent was overshadowed by speculation, but today, the truth belongs to her. What about you? Did you ever believe some of these rumors about her love affairs? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories about Hollywood's most misunderstood stars.